Thank you, Teresia, for hosting this. It's just, I know it's a lot of work, and it's just, the things that Teresia DeVroom does with this Marymount Center are just amazing. You know, the people she brings in, and I'm, you know, really honored to be here as part of it. Okay. So this project, I mean, a lot of books that have poetry and illustrations are books that the poets wrote the poems and then the artists illustrated the poems. This is like the opposite of that, okay? The Gronk did his drawings and paintings, and I was so captivated by them that I started writing poems to them. And eventually I had to fess up to Gronk that I was doing this. I said, Gronk, is it okay if I write poems to your...
Well, I post my daily drawings on Instagram and Facebook. So every single day, I figure for me, art making is a discipline. So you have to do it every single day. With her, she also has that same kind of discipline. So we connected initially at the very beginning from before even the book was done. And the book took how many years to do?
2, 3.
2 or 3. 3 years. But again, she would look at some of my imagery and it would conjure up things for her. And that was, to me, very exciting. It was a different approach than me illustrating, because I don't think of myself necessarily as an illustrator. They're each individually an art piece. So she has access to it, and she kept on coming to the studio and borrowing more, and then writing a piece about each one of the artworks. So it truly is a collaboration.
Was writing these poems. So let's get started. Okay, Mel, first slide. This is the one that got it started, because I looked at this and I kept thinking, like, what is that bird saying, right? And then I could only think of one thing the bird was saying, and then I thought of all these things the guy was saying. So it's really a poem about what the guy is thinking. Here it goes. The blackbird says, I love you. Bob Dylan smoked cigarettes. I wish I still could. This is what he's thinking. Wish I'd written the book called Useful Information for the Soon-to-Be Beheaded. Wish I'd written the phrase, like the blindness of noon. My mother wielded a mean sewing machine. In my mind, I'm hanging onto a branch swept by wind. Okay. Next. As far as weird energy goes, I'm your guy. My brain is a museum of stones. Even when we feel this way, like jaded masonry, we are things through which the stream of existence flows. And yes, I've read the poems you left me. You can tell that I like them. My jade gray teeth are glowing. Next. That faraway skirted creature in the beautiful painting. And this has a line from Rilke in it, which kind of stands out in the poem, so I think you'll notice it. You are aroused by the way I pose. I'm just trying to be worthy of this halo of roses. Or is it made of artificial fruit, cheerily dyed for the cheap chapeaus of destiny? That's it. How would I know? I've been swimming all day in the water in which embryos float. My body the size of a toothbrush, more or less. I dreamt of a garden of beautiful humans. The bodies were red, and vines among them rose greenly. I sat in there for a long time thinking of something I wanted to say to you, something this side of intelligent, something about how we're bodies and that's that. Wasn't the garden miraculous? It had no fruit in it at all. It had no death at all. My epaulets are on fire. And the person inside me is frightened. And the flames are vertical, two wavering spirits standing upright in their graves. The silence here is like science, antiseptic. And the person inside me is dying to pat me on the back. I'm a poet. This is to be expected. That was funny. If only, if only we had a pair of asbestos gloves. If only we had arms. So, wait, can you go back there a second? Okay, so this business about faces inside faces, right? This is one of the things that really attracted me to this work because I feel like that, you know? And I was telling Gronk this, he said, no, that's me. Okay, meet my puppet. A green claw has risen like a puppet from the end of my arm. It is a beast that will feed me only dry funeral cake. It is a green beacon that beckons lovers and wants to pinch them too. It's waving to you like the sea, the green silk sea. Sometimes I hide it under my shawl. Sometimes it turns around and scratches me. Sometimes it grabs a pencil and writes, "Everything you dream of can come true." I am in love with it.
That's when she's talking about me.
You wish.
The room is full of smart asses. So
I'm waiting for the. Take that drink out of her hand.
Only the moon is immortal. I'm hovering over a flame and my body is made of ice. In this predicament, I realize, one, I've made this fire, so my deep need for marvels could be satiated, and two, God made me ice so that ultimately I will be transformed. But it wasn't like that at all. Yes, I lifted the skull. I said, "Alas, poor Europe." But the skull in my hand belonged to a monster. Thoughts like gunshots flickered all around us in the communal graveyard. The beastly skull said, "Why the gloomy thinking, man?" Everywhere, unspoken wisdom shed leaves the way families shed lives. I love this drawing so much.
So do I.
You're seeing things that aren't there. I only want what's best for you. Which is why I've got to say that giant blue ghost horse you think you're standing under isn't real. It isn't full of ghost Greek soldiers. It won't help you capture the famously beautiful woman. Plus, even as an act of the imagination, it's taking up a lot of atmosphere in here. And people are starting to talk. Who's the guy with the giant blue ghost horse that isn't real, they're saying. It's you they're talking about. You projecting your interior life onto the world. You poet. It's you. This is a tool, but also a weapon. Pointed up, it scratches the sky. Pointed down, it sends a shock wave to the center of the earth where our black roots were entwined at the beginning. It is an arrow, a divining rod. My orange eyes watch you lift it. What will you do now? Write a poem? You are face to face with the gods, wearing your last green ball gown. Do not disappoint me. The cul-de-sac of no friends. This is so much fun. You're not a ghost, you're a block of ice. And I'm having sad, bad memories tonight. The way things stand between us now, I won't be showing my slideshow of our past sexual encounters. Yes,
God.
I am that petty. These things happen, Federico. The day I came to the red cave where poems are born, wearing my best black dress, you were inside, and we agreed that although the exquisite glimmer of eternity shines in the depth of all suffering, we were tired of the constant throbbing of police cars. We were tired of the mass-produced melancholy of these days. We agreed that words that had once been torn bleeding from our hearts now seemed void of meaning. May I come in? I asked. Yes, you said. That word, as pure as a bird's song, almost startled us both. That's a poem that's dedicated to Federico Garcia Lorca. That answers that. You're an elegant hand holding up a bouquet of black feathers. I'm a stick figure of a person with flames on the top of my head. I love you because you're flammable. You love me because you haven't read the warning labels. Someday, like all good ideas, will be forgotten. But meanwhile, we live here on a planet called yesterday. It dies every night. That being said, God was crying. Her smile was frozen somewhere in the northern sky. One large tear fell like a hailstone between my thumb and forefinger, which I held up out of the ocean like an okay sign. Fairy tales at my age? I swallowed the tear because God knows that joy is a wound we all must carry. She is also a bird and wind. I was also drowning. Oh, this one is one of my favorites, too. Don't do it! Don't fall off the giant clown pants of life just because you're having your picture taken. See, right here I'm giving you the benefit of a metaphor. It's what I do. That and warn people not to talk shit about poets. Okay, this is the last one. This is Tormenta. And I struggled with coming up with a voice for Tormenta, so I didn't do it. I wrote this in the third person, but she gets a little line at the end. I mean, what would she say? She doesn't have a mouth.
We've never seen it.
We've never seen it, right? She had no age. She may have been 100 years older or younger when she stepped into the spotlight, raising her elk-bone scimitar operatically, saying, "Remember, gentlemen, I don't allow no table service during my numbers." Okay. It's all yours.
Well, for me, the interesting thing was this book started a few years back, but we had done a prior book that had poetry, and it was sci-fi poetry that Chuck and yourself wrote, and I did the images for, and that was maybe 4 years ago or so. And then in the course of seeing each other several times, and then her commenting, Gail commenting about the artwork, I think it was just a logical progression there to go from that into a book that was both her poetry and my imagery. But I initially started off with the Glass Table Collective, not knowing where it was going to go. They would come to my studio and meet and sit around in a table and argue endlessly about everything. And as you know about writers, they're all sharp and quick, and I would just sit there like, this is amazing. They're all in my studio sitting at my table. And they all have like different views of different things, and they trash people, they talk about writers, they, just everything you can imagine. I really enjoyed it. That to me was a highlight. Usually on a Sunday or a Saturday, they'd come to the studio and just start talking about books. And before you knew it, there were over 40 books with my covers from the different writers that are part of the Glass Table. So, and then it was, okay, I'm a reader myself. So, okay, I have to read these books as well. And some of them are just funny, really, truly funny. Others are very serious and dense. So you get this big range. But for me, it kind of just feeds me visually to produce a body of work like that. It comes easy after reading their books. So for me, I take a lot of my influences from pop culture. The book prior to this one was based on sci-fi movies that I grew up with, which were mostly the 50s and 60s films. They took those lines, Gail and Chuck, and assembled them as poetry. And in my own work, I kind of do what I think of automatic writing. A lot of times they initially start off with maybe a slight idea, but then it shifts and changes, and then there's something anew for me. So in that book of poetry also that we had worked on, a lot of my imagery that I was doing had a very B-movie, sci-fi sensibility. And she even crossed over when she mentioned the toothbrush, because there's a line from a movie called This Island Earth, where this man tells this woman, "Are you okay?" She goes, "Yes, are you?" He says, "I feel like a brand new toothbrush." It's poetry. So all of these kind of lines kind of sneak into my body of work. I was raised on Roger Corman and all of these, bad movies, Attack of the Crab Monsters, all of that sort of stuff. So in some way I draw from that, but also, since I'm a reader from an early age, I took a lot of stuff from writers. And when I saw The Stranger, I go, oh, she's doing something like Camus. So all of a sudden there's all, we're doing this book, okay. So there's kind of like, I feed off of all of the written text that I get in front of me. I also work with a director. His name is Peter Sellers. I'm sure he does opera. And initially, when I first started to work with him, I had met him because I was doing a set for a play that was at the Mark Taper. And we started to talk. He called me up and said, "Would you like to do Jean Genet's The Screams?" And that's what I said. "That's an unproducible play." He goes, "Yeah, that's why I'm doing it." I said, "It's so long and has so many characters." He goes, "Yeah, do you know anything about Genet?" And I said, "Well, I was reading Genet's bio the day that the Northridge earthquake hit. And in my studio, there's a big crack that goes up the side of one of the walls. And ever since, I've been calling it Genet's crack. Peter goes, "You're perfect for this production." I want you to do all the screens. So I did all the screens. Then I get another call, "Would you like to do Stravinsky?" I said, "Yeah, sure." Then he calls again, "Would you like to do an opera?" So all of a sudden, this relationship and collaboration, quite like this, and with the glass table people, writers, you feel comfortable that you are learning, because each time you say yes, for instance, to Peter, it means, well, he'll say, take 6 months out of your life for this production, which means take 2 years out of your life, because you're going to be doing a lot of reading and a lot of research. So for me, that's the fun part of doing productions with him. With the glass table, I didn't know this book was going to come about. And I didn't know what it was going to look like or what imagery Gail was going to use. And so for me, it was kind of a surprise. If you notice, there is no abstract kind of imagery. That was her choice.
Right.
She chose like the more narrative storytelling that I do. So again, it's you allow your collaborator, that's her thing. Run with it, do it. And that to me is, in a true sense, collaboration in many ways. You trust the other person. And so with the glass table, it was like, okay, it's like, I don't know what these books are going to be like, but I trust them. You know, they all are really good writers, and they're good at what they do. In fact, I did a drawing book for the glass table.
Yeah.
Your novel.
Yeah. And so, yes, the novel, but it was all drawing. And it was based on a B movie from the 50s called The Giant Claw, except mine was called A Giant Claw. And it's no words, it's just like a language of my own, basically, in many ways. But Gail and Alicia did the introduction for the book, and it turned out for me quite nice. It looks like a pulp book because the paper is kind of cheap, but I wanted that. I wanted it to look kind of pulp-like, and so that's kind of my background with the glass table and writing with Gail and Chuck and everybody else that's here.
Talk about how the covers were chosen. How they- right.
Okay, yeah. So what happens, Gronk very generously offered his art for our covers at a certain point. I mean, we went into this, we were just going to publish books.
First of all, I generously offered my studio for their meeting.
Yes, yes.
But
And
the
his-
reason why, because
There
they,
was some food.
there was always food left behind. So the other artists that lived in my building got a lot of chips and hummus for the rest of the week. Go ahead.
Yeah, we always brought food that we were trying to ingratiate ourselves so that we could come again next time. But, you know, at a certain point, you just laid out some art and said, well, you know, because we're trying to figure out what do we do about covers, what do we do? And it, you know, it didn't occur to any of us that you would do that. And then you did that. And it's just our books, you know, like when we go to, you know, the AWP conference or something, and we have a table and we put all our books out, they look fantastic. They look fantastic because they all have covers by Gronk, and people really want to be published by us, and one of the reasons is these covers. They're so beautiful. And you even did an exhibit at Beyond Baroque where
Right,
you
yes.
had
The books.
the books and the artwork, the
Right.
original artwork, and that was so cool. Yeah.
Well, I have a dealer here that has a gallery at Bergamot Station. His name is Craig Carell. So if you want to check out drawings, he has a lot of the drawings from my body of work as well. And paintings, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
He's in Santa Monica at Bergamot Station, so it's conveniently close by.
So What Books Press has been in operation for 14 years. We've published over 40 books, and they all have these fabulous covers. They aren't all totally fabulous books because, you know, you can't love everything that you publish, but I love most of it. I love most of it.
And that's where the arguments come in.
Yeah. Well, we finally, figured that out. Is the fiction writers should choose fiction, and the poets should choose the poetry, and that settled things down an awful lot.
It took a couple of years for that to figure out.
So we'll take questions, won't we? Yeah.
Yeah, so I just would like you to say a little bit more about collaboration, because I really feel like the greatest part of my life has been collaborating with other people in projects, and you've clearly done that.
Well, yeah. I was at a point as a poet a couple of years ago where I had finished I finished putting together my new and selected poems, which had pretty much, poems from the time I was 23 until, let's not talk about how old I was at the other end of it, but, a really long a big body of work, and I really thought about it, and I spent a lot of time making selections and putting the book together, and then it was together, and it came out, and I didn't know what to do, It was like, okay, that part of my life, I'm kind of done with that. I want to do something different, but I'm still a poet, and I want to write poetry, but, what direction do I go in? And I started, following Gronk on Instagram and seeing these drawings, and I heard lines. Lines came to me, and images were there, and I started writing. And just because Gronk did it, I started putting them up on Instagram, and that's how it started. And then I realized that what Gronk had given me was another voice, a new voice, and that's priceless. I mean, it's so hard to find a voice as a writer, and when you get it, you run with it. And so even the poems I'm writing now are really influenced by the voice of these poems. I really I got something that I think I hadn't had in my work before. I mean, I'd had some humor and I'd had some absurdity and stuff, but this, the absurdity sort of really kicked in with Gronk's work. And yeah, Daniel.
Well,
Oh,
I was just following up on my question about collaboration, and I was thinking about where you both come from. These two places in Los Angeles, Topanga and downtown. And there's this film historian named David James who has a wonderful book about the history of experimental cinema in LA, which is called The Most Typical Avant-Garde, and the subtitle is Geographies of Minor Cinemas. And he talks a lot about how the different parts of LA, and I just wondered if, when you think about the way people have collaborated, like in New York in the 60s, everybody's sort of in the neighborhood, in some sense. And then, of course, there are collaborations that are very, very long distance. But there's something particular about the geography of your collaboration.
right.
Because both your places, the downtown scene and Topanga are very evocative. Wonderful places.
Yeah, David James wrote an essay for the catalog called OSCO,
Yeah.
which was my show that I was in with 3 other people. And it was our group from the 70s and 80s. And it was, his essay was about the no movie, which was making movies without the use of celluloid, which was maybe a photograph that was recording an event that is not really a movie, but it looks like a still from a movie. So that was kind of the premise, and that was taking a cue from another person that wrote a book called Expanded Cinema. And Gene Youngblood is the one who wrote that book. And he talked about how the end of Hollywood type of cinema was taking place. And I read that book probably in the 70s. And it kind of, for me, was, okay, it's like, since that kind of cinema is ending, what do you do after that? And then the idea, no movie. It's making movies without celluloid. So again, that kind of propelled me to do kind of a lot of the performance pieces I was initially known for. I started off as a performance artist, more conceptually driven type artwork, tagging the LA County Museum, and doing dinner parties on traffic islands, taping people to walls and calling them instant murals. So that was my initial initial beginnings. So that absurdity was early on for me.
And that's thought of being rooted in a certain place in East
I
LA.
grew up in East LA. Downtown was my backyard. So I was the kid that would ditch school and go see movies at the Los Angeles Theater, the $1 Million Theater, all the theaters on Broadway. So for me, that was an important growing up stage for me, and visually it was captivating. And then you mix that in with Mexican films, which it has another world in itself as well. So I'm captivated by the $1 Million Theater that would do shows that kind of for me were even more outrageous than what was sanctioned art in the gallery by different artists that were doing performance type work. So there was a craziness and an absurdity that I enjoyed. We collaborated for many years, the group and I, and we never called ourselves a collective, for one thing. We were never following a Marxist theory or anything like another group did. Ours was, you take your chances. If you get caught, you carry a couple of dimes and call up a friend to come and pick you up at the police station. So that was our guidelines, that anything was possible and you took your chances if it's public art. Then one year, I get a call from MoCA. They want to see my studio and come and do a studio visit. They've heard about me. And I said, yeah, I live at the Grand Hotel on Spring Street. Well, the Grand Hotel is not very grand at all. It was kind of a house of prostitution and drugs. So I moved in because I thought it was going to be character building for me. And
You
it
met a
turned
lot
in-
of characters.
and there turned out to be a lot of characters. You know the line. Did you live there too?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a transit hotel. It was very cheap, but I turned it into a studio space. So when these two women from MoCA that came by, they were graduates of charm school. They knew how to sit with one foot in front of the other. They wore their Chanel outfit with the little black buckle and stuff on their shoes. But when they came in, they had to pay $5 to go up the elevator because that's what you do in a house of prostitution. You pay the front desk. So here are these graduates of charm school looking and fumbling into their Chanel purse, trying to find $5. They pay him and they come up, they take a look at what I'm doing, and it's all of these drawings, a lot of drawings, because I've been doing the drawings for so many years. They're kind of like my diaries. So there were probably about maybe 30 books. They picked out one, they went through it, and they said, oh, thank you so much. And I thought, that was a fast studio visit. But the next day I get a call and said, you've been picked, new directions. We have Bill Viola, Mary Kors, Jill Giegrich, all these artists that were just rising at the time, and me. So when they asked me to come in, what do you want to do? Do you want to do a retrospect? Do you want to new work? I said, because I didn't know any better, I want to do a painting the size of a football field, 300 feet by 30 feet high. They said, how long is that going to take you? Out of my mouth comes the words, 2 weeks, because I'd never done it before. And they said, what do you need? And I said, coffee and donuts. I didn't realize they meant, do you need drugs? Which MoCA could afford at the time. They can't do that now. So I did the big painting, and all of a sudden I became a painter in a lot of people's minds. So that painter didn't happen till the 80s, where I started to, well, you know, I said painting, so now everybody wants paintings. So I just started to do more and more paintings. The collaboration with the group OSCO kind of went on the wayside, And I just kind of continued to do my my artwork in my studio. In fact, I moved out of the Transient Hotel and got a studio on Spring Street where the glass table meets all the time. And it's kind of a collaboration that began, and also a sense of a period in time where downtown was really a big voice in my work. It still is. I still love the roughness. I still love the edginess to it. And Gail comes from Topanga Canyon scene, which has its own bohemian. Yeah, she comes from the hippie side. So you could explain about your relationship to your.
Well, we when we first moved here, we lived in we got a house in Venice, and we didn't know anything about. We're not from California, so. We thought, well, this can't be a bad neighborhood. There are geraniums everywhere. So we got this house, we moved in, and then like every day we lived there, 3 years or something, and every day for 3 years somebody threatened to kill one of us. As soon as we walked out the door. And we figured, okay, that's probably going to happen someday. So we had these friends who lived in Topanga, and we loved visiting them, so we decided to move to Topanga. And then what happened was people started assuming I was a nature poet. Because, how could you live in Topanga and not be a nature poet? Well, I'm not, I love nature, unlike Alicia, who doesn't have time for it. But I love it, but it just doesn't work into my writing all that often.
Right.
I just don't get inspired by it to write. I'm much more interested in language and, ideas and wordplay and stuff that happens on the page, and Gronk's art. And so there was somebody did an article in Cultural Weekly about me and said, oh, Gail Wronsky, the nature poet from Topanga. So that's when I worked on my book, Imperfect Pastorals. I decided I will try to write about nature. And, I got some good poems from that experiment, but ultimately I'm not a nature writer.
Well, one of the things also for me is that most people will assume that you have an accent. They have never met me. And when they do meet me, say for instance, if I'm in Chicago or New York in another part of the country, they usually say, "You speak English very well." And I would say impeccably.
By
So
Jove.
everybody had that notion, oh, he's probably like a cholo or lowrider. And I had no connection to that visual kind of sensibility. That was for other people to do, for other people to embrace. But that was not where I was at as an artist as well. So yeah, people have these assumptions that, you go out every single night and you party and do all these kinds of things, or that you're a rock star. I'm truly not any of that. I may act it, but I'm not.
But there is kind of a hippie aesthetic, I would say.
In my work?
Yeah.
Really? Hippie?
In terms of the freedom of it.
Hippie.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. I get that. Your students, those of us who are around this age and teach, your students just think you're a boomer, right? And I guess I kind of was at the tail end of the boomer thing, but I was more like punk rock than hippie. So especially in my early work, I think the punk rock sensibility is there much more than a hippie sensibility.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more violent at times.
Yeah, right. Violent and negative. Paul.
Well, I just wanted to hear more and then hear from both of you, but about the voice that you got given by the drawings, because read the cafe poems on Instagram, and ever since I've known you and read your work, it's like, how does she get the headspace to receive these images of life? So, if I'd ever thought that you'd be an illustrator poet, writing narrative poems that are concreted imagery from drawings, knock me over. It's just such an interesting turn. And of course, it's not like, we're not talking about straight realism or something, but
Right.
it's just such an interesting turn. And it's just, as you know, we're just starting this, but there are phrases in your collected poems that to me I could spend all day just trying to think of putting objects together and doing something that illustrate those. So hearing you, and the turn from Gronk illustrating the first ones to you illustrating is just so interesting. So how is the illustrating voice this freeing new thing rather than the usual role that you take on as illustrating a visual work with words?
Gee, that's a really tough question, Paul.
Do you have any stupid questions?
Yeah.
I have a stupid question.
I've always told there are no stupid questions.
The stupid question is that you are translating, right? You are translating his paintings in a way
Yes.
into poetry. You are a translator too, and that's because I need to be at the center of this thing, and I'm so lucky to have you as my translator.
I hadn't thought about that, Alicia, but between working on my kind of body of work, the new and selected, and this new work, I translated Alicia's poems. I mean, I didn't really, I helped Alicia translate the poems, basically. But that's true, and that was a collaboration. And that was so easy and fun. I mean, the translating itself wasn't easy, but I mean, just working with you was so much fun and so gratifying that maybe that's kind of the step in between that led me to collaborating with Gronk.
So what are we doing next?
Don't forget to buy books.
Yay! We will sign them.